Come on, Patty, hit it.
Oh, goodness.
Hit him, Patty.
That got away from me. I still didn't get your attention.
Yes, you did.
I apologize for that. Good evening and welcome to Elmhurst City Hall. Tonight is Monday, November 26, 2012, and the City Council is meeting tonight for a Committee of the Whole meeting. In the absence of Mayor DeCiani, as clerk, it is my job to start the meeting, and please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will now call the roll so we can establish a quorum. Pezza.
Here.
Gudenkauf.
Here.
Leader.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Graham.
Here.
Polumsky. Here. York.
Here.
Hipskin.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Levin. Absent. Kennedy. Absent. Morley.
Here.
Wagner. Absent. Mulliner.
Here.
11 present, 3 absent. Okay, before we get started with the meeting, I'm going to need a motion to appoint Alderman for Mayor Pro Tem to conduct tonight's meeting. And what we usually do is, our tradition has been to appoint the longest-serving alderman, which is Alderman Mulliner. So do I have a motion to appoint Alderman Mulliner?
I respectfully decline because I'm a candidate for mayor. I would nominate Michael Bram, who's the next longest sitting.
Okay, so that's a motion, right? Do I have a second? Oh, Gudenkauf. Okay, we can do this with the voice vote. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? We have none. The motion carries. Okay, Alderman Bram.
Thank you, Clerk Spencer. Clerk Spencer, do we have anybody signed up for public comment this evening?
Yes, we do, Mayor Pro Tem. We have one, Claude Pagash, 566 West Gladys.
Claude, as you know, for public comment, you have 3 minutes, and we are anxious to hear any of your feedback you have for us. Thank you.
As a new mayor, Bram, you better hold up. Claude Pagash, 566 West Gladys. You've gathered to talk about Han. You got a problem. It's been a problem for a long time. Elmhurst is not a utopia. You bought the land, and I still don't understand why the city's in the real estate business. And you've sat on it like a chicken trying to hatch an egg. You haven't succeeded. Now you're going to try it again. Unfortunately, you're on the short end of the deal. Anybody that would have wanted that property would have bought it. You did. So any deal you cut, you got no bargaining power at all. They're going to tell you what they're going to do, what they're going to pay for, and if you don't like it, they'll take a walk. And that, gentlemen, is reality. And ladies, you should have never gotten a real estate business, but you're still in it, and you're still doing it. So if I was in the negotiation to do anything down there, I'd make sure you guys all buckled. Just like you did on that little piece of land for Superior. You'll buckle, because you can't afford not to. And the people that are going to wind up paying are the residents. You'll have your project, but you'll make sure that the residents of this town pay a very, very dear price. And you didn't inherit, you inherited the problem. but you're stuck with it. And if you don't realize that now, wait till you start bargaining. You got nothing to bargain with. Not a thing. Tried every kind of, you had people come in here and tell you what you could get away with. You didn't accept it. And the guy that did have it, he walked away from it. And if it had any value to any real estate developer, he would have bought the land. And then you wouldn't have had to worry about it. You haven't done a thing with it, but turn it into a parking lot. And you're losing money on that. As Mr. Leader says, we lose tax dollars every year on it. And that's where you are. And finally admit it to yourselves. Just tell the public they're going to have to pay through the nose for what was done. Thank you.
Thank you, Claude.
Oh, did you want me to just? Well, that concludes public forum as far as who has signed in tonight. If anyone else would like to come to the microphone, Mr. Mayor, I leave that to you.
Is there anybody in the audience who did not sign in for public forum would like to speak now in regards to the request for proposal discussion we have tonight for Han Street? Since there's no sign of hands, I would like to go to the only agenda item for this evening, which is the RFP workshop, the Han Street redevelopment project, and I would turn that over to City Manager Grabowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight what we're doing is we're asking the City Council for comments regarding the draft request for proposals for the Han Street project. Following up the information submitted to us by Tracy Cross Company, we felt the next step was to come back to the Council with a draft RFP for discussion. The draft document calls for a mixed-use retail and residential development or a project of the developer's initiative which they feel is suitable and buildable for success in Elmhurst. This allows great flexibilities for ideas outside of what the Cross study indicates. I would like to point out before Assistant Manager Kopp takes over that the dates in the draft document were merely placeholders. We'll adjust them necessary to accommodate our collective schedule, and tonight we're asking for your input to improve the document and the process. We can then amend the document and call another committee of the whole meeting to agree on what the timing should be for this project. And with that, I would ask Assistant Manager Kopp to walk us through the RFP document, and then we can answer questions, your questions, as we work through the presentation.
Sounds good. Assistant City Manager Kopp.
Thank you. Well, quick, I'll go over, hit some of the main points of the RFP. Obviously, it's more detailed than what this presentation on the PowerPoint will be. But like City Manager Grabowski said, a couple assumptions were made for this RFP to be in the draft form for this workshop. And one was that the city will control all 10 parcels before the RFP will be issued, and that the final Tracy Cross study will be in our hands, and it will coincide with what the RFP states. Wrong button there. The executive summary showed that reinforcement of the connections between the central business district and the north downtown business district, which is C4A, is of paramount importance. So we want this project to connect the central downtown to the north downtown. And the proposed development calls for a first floor retail back to the residential component or the highest and best use of these parcels. So if a developer has an idea other than what we mentioned here with the first floor retail and the residential component, then we'll accept those proposals also. The development's got to include a minimum of 100 public parking spots. That's what's in the parking lots right now on the property that we own, plus whatever parking is needed for the proposed development. This here just shows all the parcels the 10 parcels we're talking about. Alderman Gudenkauf, do you have a question?
Can I just ask, first of all, a procedural question? Do you want us to save questions to the end? Would you prefer that, or do you want us to ask questions as we go along?
We're comfortable asking questions as you go along, if that's all right, Mr. Chairman.
That's fine. Alderman Gudenkauf.
The parking part of this, did we settle on 100, you're proposing 100 because that was the initial project and because that's currently what we have? Is there is this something that you want to talk about, or do you think that, clearly you think this is the best number of parking spaces to have, but it's the number that we settled on, I don't know, 7
Yeah,
years
right,
ago?
that's pretty much where it came from. That was 100, to replace the 100 spots that are in use right now. Now, there's also a section in the RFP that the city would be interested in more parking spots if there was availability for it and the cost was appropriate. So we're not set on 100 for sure. No less than 100 is what we're thinking, but maybe more than 100.
That would be general city parking as opposed to what the zoning code determines is necessary for the residential and retail component?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Pezza.
Thank you. Is that the number that was in the prior,
Yes.
the same number, 100?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
And there's the parcels. This is a C4A district, which was developed, I don't know, about 10 years ago?
Beginning of the century.
Yeah, so about 12 years ago, the city council thought to help better control that district, they made it a C4A district. And some of the requirements of a C4 district is that any site development plan review for all developments in the district. So any development up there has got to be reviewed, and it goes through the normal process. It goes through the zoning and planning process and to the city council. So if you're going to develop something in that area, it's got to go through that process. That's one of the requirements of C4. It doesn't mandate any building or parking setbacks, and the minimum bulk standards is that building height will not exceed 4 stories or 45 feet on the York Street side of that block, but on the west side of it, where Addison Street is, it's only 3 stories or 35 foot high. So sort of melt into the residential that's there across the street on Addison. The zoning ordinance for retail is 2 spaces per 1,000. It's 10 spaces for a restaurant use per 1,000. The floor area ratio is not to exceed 4.0. Therefore, the total square footage of the building itself cannot be any more than 4 times greater than the lot size, which is about 120,750 square feet. So you could probably get a building that's 480,000 square foot total floor area. And then if you're talking about residential units, it needs 1,500 square foot of lot area per dwelling unit. So if you take 120,000 square feet divided by 1,500, it gives you about 80 units. And some of the objectives and requirements, there's about 7 of them that are in the RFP. Parking solutions, one of them. And again, at least 100 parking spots that are public parking spots. Talk about underground parking should be considered as part of the overall plan, especially if you're talking about residential units. And the architectural should be sensitive to the parking deck design so it fits into the area. Sort of like we did with the Large Street deck. I think that fit really well into the neighborhood. The neighbors were happy about it, so that type of design. Quality architecture, again, design characterize the visual interest of high quality design materials. Building design guidelines should be incorporated. The downtown plan in 2006 has building and design guidelines incorporated in it. We would expect that any RFP would have those same building and design guidelines incorporated in their proposal. New structures to further enhance the historic character of the downtown. Complement the residential use, as we talked about before, on the west side of Addison Street. And then all 4 sides of the building should have a finish to them. No back end or windowless sides to the building. So all 4 sides are a front. Sustainability, incorporate environmental sensitive components in the development plan. LEED certifications are favorable. Improve water use, energy use, all the sustainable products. We're expecting that to be part of the RFP also. Pedestrian amenities and open space. We talked about this here a couple of times with this property already, that there's a connection between the downtown to the north to this project itself, a pedestrian connection between the two. The experience as it relates to the building scale, lighting, the landscaping, so it's pedestrian friendly and it all ties in. Interactive public open space, again, we're expecting that part of this development. The RFP does not say how much of the development has to be in open space. That's something we could talk about. But it says it has to have an open space. And the open space Has to be pedestrian friendly, someplace to visit, gather, interact with others, including seating and lighting. So it's an actual meeting place. It's the sidewalks, the streetways, and those things do not count as public space, as we state in the RFP. And again, public art is welcome if it's welcoming and it brings people to gather in those areas. It could be a sculpture, fountains, so like we have in the downtown city center right now. Something that ties that all together. And then again, we talk compliance with the 2006 downtown plan. It's got to comply to all Elmhurst zoning codes, life safety codes, building codes, unless there's some kind of zoning relief is pursued. On the ground floor, York Street frontage shall be devoted to retail uses. And there's an Exhibit 5, I have it at the last slide in here. And what we did is we picked out specific uses that would meet that retail use. If you look at the actual zoning code for C4A, there's a couple pages of possible uses. But we didn't, the professional uses, the office uses, we didn't think those were appropriate uses. We think the retail use is what those first floor York Street frontage should have. Again, compliance with 2006 downtown plan, municipal codes. It says that rehabilitation, new construction should respect the existing scale of downtown building height. 2 to 4 story buildings will continue to be predominant in the downtown area. It says somewhat taller buildings may be appropriate adjacent to major intersections or other selected locations. And 1 story buildings really don't meet the character of the street wall effect, so those would not be favorable. And then, this was in the last one also, is applicants are encouraged to pursue opportunities for partnership with adjoining property owners if there's a possibility that a partnership with some other surrounding property will make it a better project. I think the city would be in favor of that. Again, building and design guidelines. It's a 2006 downtown plan, had building design guidelines in it, and we're expecting that any proposal that's brought forward would incorporate those guidelines in their proposal. Now, the submission requirements, as City Manager Bobrowski talked about, the dates in there are just to show a timeline. So if we said we started this thing December 1st, it would be end of March, beginning of April by the time this process ran its full course if it stayed on schedule. So we just want to put some dates in there to sort of give a feel of where this would take us and how long it would take us to get where we want it to be. And then again, it states in the RFP that if applicant team thinks they have more than one good idea, to share those good ideas as long as they meet the requirements of the RFP as far as all information that's presented, that we're willing to accept more than one possible proposal from any one developer or applicant team. The selection process, again, submits proposals, to evaluate the proposals, city staff, the mayor and city council approval, and then a public presentation interview of the candidates by the mayor and city council. Mayor and city council, based on those presentations, will select finalists. And then there's more requirements for the finalists to submit some background information on pro forma and analysis and more detailed design work. And then they would come in and present those more detailed proposals. And then the city council would make a selection, authorize staff to negotiate a public-private development agreement with the selected applicant. And as far as ways of determining which proposal will be better than the rest, we picked these 8 categories, and we just said 10 points for each category: parking solutions, quality architecture, pedestrian amenities, consistent with downtown plan, site layout, land use, qualifications, financial capacity, economic impacts, and sustainability. And that's something that we just put 10 points in each one of them. It may be the thought of city council that some are more important than others. That's a discussion we could have, or some other means of analyzing. But this sort of picks out all the important aspects of the RFP. We felt those were important things that they should be evaluated on. You look through the application process, we don't list them all on here, but there's like 18 different requirements that they have to present on their proposal, from everything from the owners of the business to what their design would be. And then when you said we get to the selection of finalists, there's more detail that needs to be brought forward in their initial proposal, like the 3D model design or electronic rendering you know, more detailed floor plans, conceptual illustrations of landscaping, you know, what the purchase price of the city-owned or controlled properties and appropriate ROWs would be. What do they propose they pay us for the property we own? And then we want to know the cost of the construction for each of those 100 parking spots, because I would imagine that would offset, to some extent, the cost of the property. So, and then their financial information. This is just part of the points. There's actually, I think, 17 or 18 more detailed points they'd have to present to us. But this will all be given to the City Council prior to any presentation. And then the Mayor City Council, utilizing the same ranking system, will pick a finalist. And I think that's important to state that the city, you know, has no obligation to accept any proposals. We can go through the whole process, and at the end, we determine we don't like any of them, or we don't want to move forward with any of them. We don't have to move forward with any of them. So that's spelled out in the RFP, so any applicant team that's proposing a development, they know up front that the city has no obligation to accept any of those proposals if it doesn't meet the needs of the city. So that's pretty much running through the front to the back in a very quick manner. If there's any specific things we want to talk about and changes or additions to it, be glad to talk about those. And this is just that last Exhibit 5. And there were a couple things we added already on that. So if you see the last 23 is a food and grocery store. That wasn't on there before. And hotels under conditional uses. Those are truly uses that are in the C4A zoning district right now is permitted in conditional uses. Like I said, there's a whole bunch more than that. There's like almost 3 pages of them. If there's some in there that the City Council thinks that shouldn't be in there or should be in there, that's something we'd like to know so we can add those to the RFP and the exhibit.
Thank you, Assistant Manager Kopp. Any questions from the Alderman? Alderman Gutenkopf.
Thank you. I know that you were trying to summarize the document that you gave us a draft of, and I really appreciate that. There are a couple of things that I made some notes on. I thought that would be worthwhile for the City Council to talk about that you didn't get a chance to introduce. And I think one of them is the stormwater component. I know that we're requiring the developer to meet the county's stormwater criteria, but, and I know I brought this up on other projects, I think whenever the city's involved in a project like this, it's an opportunity for us to look at alternative stormwater management techniques or to go above and beyond what the county is requiring. Had you had a chance to think about that, or is there some, you know, some way that you think we ought to be pursuing this?
Well, actually, I believe, you know, Mike Hughes is here, might be able to answer this better than I can, but I believe the new stormwater ordinance, because that's all impervious surface right now, there would be no stormwater required for that site.
But we could, as a city,
yes,
require on our own, above and beyond the county stormwater, because like you said, it's all impervious surface, and we have an opportunity to improve that. We have an opportunity to take the parking spaces, for example, or to incorporate some kind of stormwater storage in this site.
That's correct. I think part of the sustainability portion, the grading on that would be part of that also. You know, I know past proposals had a green roof on them, which would help in the stormwater aspect of it, or in the parking area, putting bioswales in. I'm sure, yeah, we could, I don't know what requirements we could, how we can put the requirements, or just make it as a favorable. Look at that favorably, or do you want to actually state specific requirements?
Well, and I think we should stipulate in this project that any proposals from the developer that enhance the stormwater management of the site above and beyond what it currently is, and maybe we want to cite something specific, would be favorable points. But I think we should spell it out.
Yeah.
I think it's an appropriate suggestion, and the city manager will take a note of that unless we want to debate that a little bit further at this time. Some of the aldermen could provide their feedback one way or another. Other than that, we'll take a note and possibly include it in the draft for further discussion at the next meeting.
Okay.
And just a general comment before we move on, if we are referencing the document, the draft document, if we can please just state what page and approximately what paragraph so we can all switch to that and read along. Alderman Polomsky.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to ask that we add another component in here, and while I know that any development is going to meet disability access requirements, I'm wondering if proposals could include some approaches related to universal design or ways that use barrier-free concepts to more fully include people with disabilities to the greatest extent possible. For example, some of these principles would relate just to dwelling units, but maybe others more to the open space, and those could be applying these principles, for example, counters designed with varying heights, ramp access where it's not required, extra wide hallways or sidewalks to allow for turnaround space. And I'm wondering if it's possible to ask developers to include a description of how they're going to deviate from accessibility requirements to allow for more access, and if possibly, we could have this included maybe in number 10 of the project description. Let me see the page of that.
Page 14?
No, I'm sorry. Number 10, I guess, of the project.
Number 10, on page 14, is that?
I believe so. So included in there, and I'm wondering, I don't know if it should be included in the ranking as its own item, but maybe part of a description or something for us to consider when we're ranking them or considering those to call finalists.
Okay.
Please, thank you.
Another item for City Manager Grabowski to take note of. Alderman York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One thing I think it was addressed in here, I don't have the page number. I'm not going to try and struggle to find it right at this very second, but impact statements relative to particularly District 205.
Yes.
And I know at one point in time, I believe there were comments made, I think it was during the Tracy Cross presentation, but that it is possible to have an ordinance that limits the number of people that can occupy a residence and things like that. So I want to be sure that, that we consider those types of things in an impact study with relation to District 205 and other schools in the area.
Okay.
Alderman Pezza.
Thank you. Just a few questions, and thank you for clarifying that those dates that were plugged in were just placeholders, because I couldn't understand why we would have a January 14th return, so I'm glad to hear that those are just placeholders. And I think when I look at the dates, and when, we said we would talk about potential dates, I think one of the major pieces regarding a date to hear back is financial end. And City Treasurer Dyer, had an excellent idea.
I'd ask the city manager to consider finding a person, either an actual lender or someone very familiar with commercial lending on these types of projects, and inform the council of what we should look for in a developer who would have the financial strength to complete a project of this size, so we get a good candidate from the get-go. Thank you.
In the RFP itself, under the finalist presentation, there's a section, financial information. I can run that by, we use Kay McKenna for a lot of the commercial financial stuff. They can take a look at the requirements we have in here. There's like 4 of them in here, and see if they think those are appropriate to measure.
I think.
Is that what you're talking about?
I was looking for someone to tell us what we should be looking for.
That's what I mean. I'll have them take a look at these and say, is this okay, or should we have, or do we need more?
Enlarge it a little bit.
And even if it were a large bank or someone that actually deals with commercial loans, that would be even better.
Okay.
If I can add to that, perhaps this is a good opportunity to use the Economic Development Commission. I think there might be 1 or 2 members of that would help us, be able to help us in that component.
Yeah, the more the merrier.
That's good.
The other piece is I did have a chance today to talk to just a couple of developers that do large development like this with TIF projects, basically in the city of Chicago, but just to get a feel for what kind of a time frame is feasible in this day and age. And it sounds like 9 months seems to be a reasonable time because of the financing piece. I think developers today would almost hesitate to come forward with a project that they don't know or feel comfortable that they would actually get the money for. So I think whatever we do, timing-wise, we need to be very careful that we give them not only enough time to view the property and do their due diligence with the rest of this, but be able to actually know or come close to knowing that they'll be able to get the money. So,
Alderman Pezza, are you asking for are you making a statement in regards to the total time frame or the initial submittal for the RFP?
the total time frame that they would have to respond back by.
The initial response?
Yes. To put their proposal together so that they can look into the financial piece. And you mentioned open space. I think that's something really important. Being in the first ward, we do hear a lot. There's really no park or open space area north of the tracks, between North Avenue and the tracks. We've had residents come to us asking for like small pocket parks or some more open green gathering space in that immediate area. Perhaps this would be something that we could encourage to be a more friendly open space. I know Crescent Court, they consider that area behind the building where the retention is to be their open gathering space. And that's not really an inviting space. I think we'd like to see whatever the open space is be more visible and inviting to the public and useful. The other question was, I think you mentioned in the RFP, did you mention disclosure in the RFP of who the actual partners are and all that?
Yes. That goes into details of any let's see, where's that at here? It starts on page 13. It asks for any principles and relationship entity has with the parent corporation, relationship entity has with any Elmhurst city officials or city staff, contributions to local election funds, identification of individual applicant team members, including project managers. Got quite a...
And then I guess the last question is, will the building are the building and design guidelines always included, specifically laid out in the RFP, or is it just something we ask them to look at on their own, or how does that work?
They're attached to the RFP as one of the exhibits, and in the RFP, the expectation is that those design and building guidelines will be part of their proposal.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman York?
Thank you. I like the ranking process proposal that you have here. I had a question about that, though. Is the ranking process going to be 14 folks turning numbers in, or are we all going to try and agree on what the appropriate ranking is for parking solutions as a group? Or had you given that any thought?
No, I would think that it would be the average of 14 responses for each one of those categories.
Okay.
15, counting the mayor.
Alderman Morley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question back to the timing, because there's a couple of dates listed in here. They're not all laid out. But as you'll recall, 7 years ago, we issued an RFP, and we issued it at the exact same time, right over the holidays, and didn't get many responses. So whatever we do, we either should, my opinion is we should add to the timing. Anything before the new year is bonus time as far as I'm concerned for these folks. My question is, if I read this correctly, and I know that they're just place markers, but do you see it as at the time that we collectively agree to the RFP and what it's going to look like, do you see the initial submission to be 6 weeks?
That's what we were estimating.
And is that something that, you know, the market will bear? I mean, I think we gave them maybe 8 weeks last time. I don't want to give them too much time for the initial response. I know the initial response is, do you qualify and are you interested? My only point would be, I would start the clock ticking really the first week of January on this. I don't want to get caught in a situation where maybe we only have 2 people respond and people feel that maybe because of the holidays, a lot of people just said, look, I don't have the time to do it.
Yeah, that's fine. Like I said, with the timeline was put in there just as a place markers. The first initial, we have more time when we select a finalist because there's more detail that's needed out there. There's more financial information that's needed. But I think that's around 2 months that, you know, if that's not enough time, I mean, that could be expanded too.
Okay.
Just a comment on that would be that I think this is our initial review of the RFP, and we still need to turn this into something that we can send out. So unless City Manager Grabowski or Assistant City Manager Kopp has other thoughts, I don't see us sending this out before the first of the year, which would prevent us from doing the same thing as we have in the past and made that mistake of sending it over the holidays and not getting the number of applicants as we would have liked to have seen. So I think from a procedural standpoint, we're on par with your thoughts, Alderman Morley. Any other questions? Alderman Dunn.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Again, back to the dimensions that we're using for ranking. Almost all of them are what the finished product is envisioned to look like, except for the applicant's qualifications. And I think they're very critical. We're reviewing some responses to proposals right now for our refuse and recycling contract, and the applicant qualifications are very critical. So we may want to look at the relative weight of those. Along with one other dimension I'd like to see is the implementation plan of the bidders, just to understand what they envision their timeline is in planning and executing this project, along with potentially a budget estimate on the dollar value of it. I think those are some reality checks on the validity of the proposals that we would see.
Alderman Dunn, do you have a recommendation of those two ranking criteria that you would like to see have above 10 points, being 12 points, 15 points? What weight would you like to propose at least?
I would say it needs to be more than 1/8 of the overall weighting, but probably less than half.
And can you repeat which two again?
Well, the number 6 on page 16, the applicant qualifications, I think that needs to receive higher relative weight in the assessment of the project proposals. And then I also suggested that we add maybe a 9 and 10 on the implementation plan of the project, and then the budgetary number on the project.
Any other further discussion on the ranking at this time? No?
Another question.
On the ranking, Alderman Pezzo? Okay. Any other questions? Alderman York?
I have a question maybe for Alderman Dunn, if I may. On the ranking for the development cost, I understand that, but if one proposal's for something much grander than something else, how do you necessarily compare those? I guess it would be my question, and so I think what you identified are very key characteristics. However, I think that if everything lays out the way we think it should, we should be able to see in the financial capacity, the applicant qualifications, we should be able to see who is qualified and who isn't. So if somebody came in and they were a little bit weaker, they might get a 2, whereas somebody else might get a 6 or a 7. So I just wanted to ask that question because I didn't quite get it, I guess.
Just Alderman Dunn, if I may. City Manager Grabowski stated that the definition of item number 7 being the economic impacts to the community should and will encompass the items that you're referring to.
And if I could add to that, under On page 14, point number 16, it asks for a detailed description of the impact for sales tax, hotel motel tax, food drink tax, property tax, and any other tax to the city of Elmhurst. So I think that kind of addresses what you're getting at and what Alderman York is asking for clarification on as to how do you gauge different scales of a development. You know, if one's a $60 million project, if one's a $50 million project, I think the value that they bring to the city is what we're looking for, not just the overall cost of the project. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, and there's a return that the city would get on this project, and what the developer spends is really out of their own pocket. I think that information is of interest, but I think point well taken that really what the city is interested in is what return we're going to get on a project. But to look at a $20 million project versus an $80 million project, that would be a significant different proposal that we'd be evaluating, and you know, one might have a lot higher risk than the other because of the investment.
That's true.
Assistant Manager Cup.
Also on page 14, number 15, I think addresses exactly what we're talking about, Alderman Dunn. It's a pro forma that details estimated project costs, project revenues, provided both the city side and the applicant side of the proposal. So I think that will address the budget cost and the project costs for the...
Okay, great.
Alderman Levin.
I'm sorry I missed the beginning. Would you mind doing it again?
Sure.
In the ranking process, the one thing that seems to be missing it is sort of the subjective analysis. I mean, I'm picturing people coming in with some renderings. I mean, they're going to show who they are, what they've done, all these qualifications, and I'm assuming that at the first cut, they're coming in with some photographs or drawings saying, here's the vision that we have for that site. And none of these categories really seem to go to the subjective, what do we like? It could be the highest quality architecture with the best parking, and the land is used most efficiently from a very qualified applicant, and you could have two of those, and one of them looks terrible somehow to us, another one looks good. So is there some sort of component of this ranking process, which I think would be very important to the community and to the council, that says they're all these things 1 through 8, but this one really looks attractive, or it looks like it would fit into our community where another one doesn't.
City Manager Grabowski.
Well, I don't know that we have it spelled out to define in words the architecture, but starting on page 26, we have example photos of parking decks, of quality architecture. I think there were a couple more exhibits in there, and open space that we think reflect Elmhurst and the city center area.
Well,
Alderman Lemon?
Yeah, I agree that we're doing that, but yeah, but to get to the point where isn't that part of the ranking process to see who the finalists are, because then they're going to refine what they're showing to talk about things, whether it's handicap accessibility or creative uses of water retention. It just seems like that should be part of the ranking process before we get to the selection of the finalists.
One of the criteria is quality architecture.
Well, and I agree. I've seen some high-quality, ugly architecture. It's. I think if you look downtown, they're talking about the Prentice Women's Hospital. I'm not saying whether I like it or I don't like it. It's quality architecture, and there'll be some who'd say, "Is that what we want in our corner?" Maybe yes, maybe no, but that's a factor, and that's something I think we need to consider.
Alderman Levin, I believe what City Manager Grabowski was stating was the definition of quality architecture doesn't necessarily mean just the actual quality of the architecture, but also one's perception of the architecture itself. And therefore, there's your subjective criteria built into that line item as well.
And then if that's the case, I would put more than 10 points in there.
Any recommendations on that, Alderman Levin, in regards to how much heavier you would like to weight that?
Off the cuff, maybe 20, 25? Because I think that parking spaces, we're telling them, depending on what their use is, we're telling them how many parking spaces they're going to give us. So unless they have some sort of creative parking, like an elevator system that would shift that 10 points, it's not really as important as that overall subjective evaluation.
Any other comments in regards to the ranking? Alderman Palumsky, did you have a comment?
Thank you. Well, I was just thinking as Alderman Levin was talking, is it more, and if I can ask Alderman Levin, more that you're asking for more of a, almost an abstract of how they believe their design encompasses what we're requesting, and sort of a more of a subjective description of that, and see if, you know, at first blush, does it meet our criteria? Is this what we're looking for? Did you cover what we're asking, and how are they presenting themselves?
Alderman Levin?
Well, I expect that most of the people who put the time in will be responsive and address all of the requirements, and I expect they'll come in with, you'll see 5 or 6 or how many ever responses showing a concept of what they want there. And I'm just saying it should meet all of the requirements, and we look at those 8 criteria and they should score pretty well there, but I just feel that what's going to sway me is looking at it and saying, you know, I can really see that on that corner. It's going to fit in with that area, or it's just going to be such an attractive site that that's what we want in our community. It's going to be something that's going to be there for a long time, and it's going to be the gateway from the north to our downtown.
Before moving on, one other option of that would be to add a 9th criteria. It doesn't say anything that we need to restrict our ranking system to 80 points, and if we wanted to have this as a separate piece of criteria instead of quality architecture, subjective architecture, or the look of the architecture, that's also an option to be discussed today. Alderman Healy.
Thank you. A couple points. I think if we're going to try to figure out how we're going to force rank or add or weight or de-weight certain things tonight, it's not going to happen. I think the process itself as outlined is fine. I think the RFP is fine. I think we need to take the time between now and the time that the proposals start rolling in to nail down how we're going to do this. Along with, I think where Alderman Level was saying is that some parts of the 8 are more important to others. Now, I'm not going to say what those are. I know what are more important to me, but the rest of us will have other ideas as well. But clearly, some of the things are more important than others, and to try to give them equal weighting, I think is doing a disservice. I think we need to further refine the ranking process so that we're all comfortable with it, even though we may not agree that what's more important in the ranking process is this, that, or the other thing, but we've got to try to nail that down. If we try to go after all 8 and weigh them equally, I don't see that as being a good way to look at things. So I don't have any suggestions now. I certainly know what's important to me, but I think to try to discuss that tonight would be very, very difficult. I think we need to take the time to further nail this down, because what's been outlined specific to the ranking process, I'm not comfortable with.
Understood. And I think tonight it's more of getting individuals' recommendations and not trying to nail it down as of tonight. I think that I agree, Alderman Healy, that would be an impossible task, and possibly that we do away with, at least in the RFP, and leave it internal in regards to the point system, but show a priority ranking process for the applicants, and the point system would be internal to the City of Elmhurst. Assistant City Manager Kopp, want to respond?
I would just wonder if the City Council would be in favor of maybe us taking and defining these criteria as clearly as possible, and maybe sending out a survey to the City Council. What do you think? Here's the definition, the best that we can define what these criteria are. What do you think the ranking should be? Get them all back, compile the data, and share the data, and see where it stands.
Sounds like a great idea. Alderman Gutenkau?
Actually, that's pretty close to what I was going to suggest, because it sounds like there's some agreement that evenly balancing these isn't going to work. I did also want to say that I think the word Alderman Levin's looking for is aesthetic, that in that quality architecture, it would be helpful if we had an outline that incorporated an aesthetic component of this building, that it's not just about meeting the design guidelines, but that there should be an overlay of how this building fits into the community. I know that that was part of what we discussed last time, and I think it's important to keep that in this project. If I may, there's another thing I'd like to move off this and talk about another point. On page 17, number 8 reads, each applicant shall provide the purchase price for the city-owned or controlled properties and appropriate right-of-ways, if utilized. My question is, are we expecting the developer to make a purchase offer to us, or are we going to establish a price?
Well, actually, from what you have on the dais tonight, one of the things I talked today with some of the staff and city attorney was maybe we should, the way we're proposing it, I mentioned earlier, was that they provide the 100 parking spots and they provide a purchase price for the property. So rather than saying, what's the purchase price for the property and we'll pay you back for the parking, just make it one number. And so part of the development proposal, they got to take into account the cost of those parking spots, right? Because going back later and saying what are the costs of those parking spots may be difficult to define.
We didn't have any trouble defining it last time. I mean, the developers came to us and said, you want this many surface parking spaces, it's going to cost X dollars. You want parking garage spaces, it's going to cost Y dollars. And
yeah, we can do that. We just thought that that was to be an easier process. It's a one number. So we can go that same way. We'll buy the 100 spots from you. That's what we had in originally. That's what you have in front of you, actually. We'll buy the 100 spots for you, and you tell us how much you'll pay us for the property. Because, you know, we figured it was 6 of one, half dozen the other. If they're going to, because they're going to make those numbers work either way. So if they just say give us one purchase price and you provide 100 parking spots, it's going to reflect the cost of those parking spots in their price, I would imagine. But we can do it either way.
No, I guess my question was more about, were we going to set a price for the property? But you're saying that no, you were expecting the developer to come to us and say, we're going to pay you this much for the property.
That's what the proposal asks for, yes. But we can do it either way.
Alderman Pezza.
Thank you. It's my understanding that there's already a going list of developers that have expressed interest. I know City Manager Grabowski said there was people that have expressed interest, and I know Feinzahl had some inquiries. 2 questions. Is there a copy of the list someplace? And then procedure-wise, once this is moving along, how exactly do we pick and choose who this goes to? Do we send it out to just that list of people plus others we think might be interested? Who and how chooses where these RFPs go?
I would think that we send it to we have 8 on the list right now. I have that list. I'd be glad to share it with you. I have no problem with that. I think Tracy Cross has people that he thought would be interested in the development, and I think we advertise it. I think the more people that know about it, the better. Some of the people on the list I would never expected to send it to, but they called us and said they're interested in it. So I would say we publicize it in the appropriate means for a proposal like this, and the more people that get it, the better.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Just one question for me in regards to, I believe that it was stated somewhere in here about the city of Elmhurst being responsible for moving the utilities that are surrounding this area or might need to be moved for this development. Is that something that we even want to consider putting in the RFP, you know, at the city of Elmhurst cost? Wouldn't that be something that we would discuss further down the line, and what would be the necessity for pretty much telling them that's an incentive to come here and do this development?
I'm not sure that we said that we would pay for them. I said, let me actually put in here now. The city will work with the development team to relocate and/or bear utilities to complement the proposed development. You know, so we'll work. It doesn't say that we're going to actually pay for them. It says we'll work with them to accomplish that. Now, that's something that the RDA will have to spell out. I think, like you said, it would be a negotiable item.
Okay. Okay, if there's no other questions, then I guess procedurally, City Manager Grabowski or Assistant City Manager Kopp, what are our next step for the Hunt Street RFP proposal?
I think we'll do that survey we talked about for the ranking. We'll make some of these suggested changes that different aldermen suggested tonight and try to finalize it the best we can to get it back to you. I don't know what the timeline would be, maybe before the holiday, get it back on the councils, and then make a decision after the first of the year as far as when it'll go out.
Sounds good. If there's no other...
This is on the website?
What?
This is not on the website yet. It's a draft that we're working on.
It will not be on the
Oh, it will be, yes. When it's finalized, absolutely, it'll be on the website.
Will it be available to the press now?
Well, it's got quite a few changes to be made to it right now, so I'd hesitate to send it out because it's not a final document.
Okay, that is the end of our discussion for this agenda items and the end of the committee of the whole meeting for today. So if I can get a motion to adjourn. Alderman Morley and Alderman York.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.